world is slowly quieting down, and the noise of the day fades into a soft whisper. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and allow your mind to wander. Tonight, Stories Before Sleep invites you to travel back through time to strange, forgotten tales that calm the soul and spark your imagination. All you need to do is listen and slowly close your eyes. Let's start the video. There's a place in the far north where the sea forgets to rest. An island hidden beneath veils of fog and time so remote that even maps refuse to remember it. They said the wind there carried whispers instead of air, that the gulls never flew too close, and that every night the shore itself seemed to breathe. Once, the Vikings named it Draugholm, the Isle of the Restless. They came seeking shelter from a storm, but what they found was something the sagas refused to retell. When the sun dipped beneath the gray horizon, the air turned thick, not cold, but heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Every rock, every twisted pine, seemed carved from silence. The men lit their fires close together, yet their warmth did not spread. The flame flickered as if uncertain of its duty. A scent of brine and decay drifted from the cliffs. Something in the island's heart pulsed faint, slow, like a heartbeat deep beneath stone. No bird sang that night. Even the ocean quieted, its rhythm faltering against the black sand. Those who dared to look toward the forest swore the trees moved, not by the wind, but by will. The trunks seemed to lean, listening, remembering. Somewhere within that shifting dark, a sound like a sigh rose and fell, neither human nor beast. The fire crackled, then dimmed. One by one, the Vikings began to feel it, an unseen gaze pressing against their backs. It was not fear at first, only unease, the sense of being watched by something ancient, patient. They told themselves it was the fog, or exhaustion, or the echoes of the sea. But deep inside, each man carried the same thought he dared not voice. This island is alive. As the night deepened, frost crept across the ground, though the sky was clear. The ships, moored by the shore, swayed without waves, as if tugged by invisible hands. A faint hum, like a low chant, began to rise from the cliffs. It had no melody, no words, yet it filled the air with a terrible harmony. The Vikings froze, unable to tell if the sound came from outside or within their skulls. Then came the whisper, soft, broken, stretched thin. By distance, a name none of them recognized, repeated again and again. The ground trembled beneath their feet, not violently, but like something shifting beneath the soil. The sea, which moments before had fallen still, surged forward, reaching for their camp. And when the first wave withdrew, it carried with it the reflection of faces that were not their own. The men turned their eyes toward the forest. In the faint glow of the dying fire, shapes stood between the trees, tall, motionless, almost familiar. The fog thickened until it seemed to crawl along the ground, wrapping itself around boots and weapons, tugging gently like hands begging to be remembered. The heartbeat beneath the island grew louder, and the chant became a rhythm, slow, relentless, like a drum calling from beneath the earth. The oldest among them, a man who had fought in 20 raids, fell to his knees. He pressed his hand against the soil, feeling it quiver. It was warm, as if something beneath was breathing or waiting to wake. Above them, the moon vanished behind the clouds, and the fire died. Darkness swallowed the camp. For a moment, there was silence, a silence so complete it rang in their ears. Then, from the direction of the sea, came the sound of footsteps walking on water. And as those steps reached the shore, the island exhaled, slow, deep and alive. The air changed when the island breathed. It carried the scent of salt and old wood, but beneath that, something metallic, like rusted blood or forgotten iron. The Vikings stood motionless, their fire long extinguished, their eyes straining against the dark. The sea, moments ago restless, had flattened in their mirror, holding the moon's ghostly reflection like a single pale eye. They listened. The sound of footsteps on water had stopped, but the echoes lingered, weaving through the fog. Each man felt the same instinct: to leave, to run, to push the ship back into the sea and let the current take them anywhere but here. Yet their legs refused to move. The soil beneath their boots pulsed faintly, a slow rhythm matching their own hearts, a tether they could not break. Far inland, a shimmer of light appeared. Not fire, not moonlight, something softer, moving between the trees as though drawn by breath. It pulsed once, then faded, leaving an afterimage behind their eyelids. Somewhere in the forest, a single crow cried out, hoarse and distant, and the sound was swallowed instantly, devoured by the mist. The youngest of the crew tried to step forward, but the ground resisted him. It wasn't the weight of his armor, it was the soil itself. Each grain clung to his boots, thickening, as if the island didn't want to let him go. He pulled free and stumbled backward, his breath ragged. The heartbeat beneath the earth quickened. A low vibration passed through the air, not thunder, not the sea, but a hum that crawled up their spines. It spread outward, rippling across the sand toward the forest's edge. The trees trembled as though in answer, their branches rustling with no wind. And from between them, faint glimmers appeared, countless tiny points of light drifting upward, like embers from an unseen fire. They floated in silence, rising and falling with the rhythm of that subterranean pulse. The men watched, trapped between awe and dread. The lights gathered above the forest canopy, circling each other in a slow spiral. Then for a heartbeat they froze, and the entire island seemed to hold still with them. When they moved again, they formed patterns, lines, runes, shapes half remembered from old stories, whispered beside hearths. The glow painted the mist in gold and silver, outlining the faint silhouette of something vast and ancient rising from the center of the woods. It was not a creature. It was not even alive in any way they understood. It was the island itself, shifting the earth, rising like the chest of a sleeping giant. The vibration deepened, echoing through their ribs, blurring the boundary between body and ground. Somewhere beneath them, something turned. Then, a sudden gust of air, warm, wet, and filled with the scent of the sea, swept through the camp. The fog parted for the first time, revealing the cliffs in the distance. Upon those cliffs stood shapes, not men, not quite shadows, frozen mid-step, facing the shore. Their armor glinted faintly, though no light touched it. Each shape was perfectly still, yet the mist curled around them as though they were breathing. A memory surfaced among the crew. The saga of the Watchers, the fallen warriors cursed to guard what should never wake. The tale had been told to frighten children. But here, on this unmarked island, it felt less like a myth and more like a warning too late to heed. The lights in the forest dimmed, flickering one by one. The pulse in the soil slowed to a steady, deliberate rhythm. A heartbeat returned to sleep. And for a brief, fragile moment, silence returned. Then, from far beneath the island, something answered that silence with a sigh, long, deep, and full of memory. The ground quivered once more, gentle but unmistakable, as if the island had shifted its weight to listen. And in that stillness, the Vikings realized the truth. The island was not cursed because of what had happened here. It was cursed because it remembered morning never truly came to the island. The light that filtered through the fog was pale and directionless, an imitation of dawn that carried no warmth. The Vikings stood in silence, eyes hollow from a night without sleep. The ground beneath them had stilled, yet its pulse remained faintly perceptible, like a whisper in the blood that would not fade. The sea lapped gently at the shore, indifferent to their fear, its surface slick with an oily shimmer that caught no reflection. They tried to speak of leaving, but the words would not settle. Each glance toward the ships revealed something wrong. ropes tangled, though no wind had blown, hulls slick with frost, despite the mild air. The sails hung limp damp as if they had soaked in the breath of the island. When one of the men reached for the oar, his hand came away marked with salt, though he had touched only wood. It was as if the sea itself had crept ashore during the night, claiming what it once owned. The leader, a man hardened by storms and raids, looked toward the forest. Between the trunks, the faint traces of footprints glimmered in the dew. Not fresh, not human. Each print seemed to sink deeper than the ground should allow, as though made by something heavier than flesh. They led inland, vanishing into a thick veil of mist that pulsed faintly in rhythm with that buried heartbeat. He stepped forward, compelled not by courage but by something older, a pull in the bones, an invitation written into the air. The others followed in uneasy silence. As they moved, the ground changed texture. Grass gave way to sand, sand to ash. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of burnt seaweed and wet stone. Beneath their boots, the soil was warm again, as if something enormous breathed just beneath the surface. The forest opened into a wide clearing, surrounded by stones the size of ships. Each was carved with symbols, runes twisted beyond recognition, their grooves filled with salt crystals. Some of the carvings glowed faintly when touched by mist. The Vikings recognized fragments, words older than their gods, prayers that belonged to no one living. The air hummed in low resonance, and the faint golden motes from the night before drifted lazily around the stones like fireflies without purpose. At the center of the clearing stood a mound, smooth, round, ancient. Its surface was covered in moss that shimmered faintly with moisture. At its peak lay a single slab of black stone, half buried, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it but failed. Carved across it was a single rune, long and sharp like a wound. None of them could read it, but all felt its meaning. It was not a name, it was a warning. A gust of air swept through the clearing, carrying with it the smell of brine and rot. The sound of the sea rose suddenly, distant yet near, as though the island itself were drawing the tide inward. The runes began to hum. The moss quivered. A thin trickle of water seeped from beneath the slab, dark and metallic. It spread slowly across the ground, filling the lines between stones, tracing the forgotten language back toward the forest. One of the men stumbled backward as the liquid brushed against his boot. The soil hissed. Steam rose in delicate spirals, carrying with it the faint scent of something burned long ago. The others watched as the dark trail wound its way to the edge of the clearing and disappeared into the mist, leaving behind only silence. Then came the faintest echo, a deep, drawn-out groan from beneath the mound, like a beam of wood straining under impossible weight. It came again, louder, vibrating through the ground, through bones, through the hollow spaces of the body. The air thickened until breathing felt like drowning. Above them, the fog swirled into a spiral. The faint glow of the runes dimmed, then returned brighter than before, the symbols shifting into new shapes as if rewriting themselves. The island's breath returned, slow and deliberate. The men fell to their knees, not in worship, but in instinctive surrender. And for a fleeting moment, the leader thought he heard the sea whisper a name, a word older than language, heavy with sorrow. It lingered just long enough to pierce his thoughts, then vanished, leaving behind an echo that would not fade. He looked at his men. Their eyes were empty, unfocused, reflecting not fear but recognition. It was as if something beneath the island had reached into their memories and stirred them awake. The hum subsided. The air lightened. The heartbeat slowed. The fog drifted closer, closing around them once more. Somewhere behind them, the tide receded, dragging sand and shells back into the sea with a soft hiss, as though the island had finished speaking. For now, they moved as if the island itself had claimed part of their will. Every sound felt distant, muffled by the same pressure that thickened the air. The forest behind them had vanished entirely, When they looked back, there was only mist gray, seamless, endless. It did not move like normal fog. It pulsed. Each contraction matched the dull throb of the ground beneath their boots. The leader tried to count his men, but the numbers refused to settle. He remembered 9 faces, then 10, then 8. Some part of him knew he should remember their names, but they slid from thought like water over stone. The hum beneath the earth had reached into their memories and rearranged the shape of time. The island was not just alive, it was thinking. A faint shimmer passed through the air, and the light changed. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending toward the mound they had left behind. The trees at the clearing's edge leaned inward, trunks creaking softly as though straining to hear. From somewhere within that green darkness came the quiet rush of movement, not footsteps, but the slow drag of something enormous shifting its weight. The men began to descend toward the shoreline, hoping the sea would still obey them. The path wound between stones veined with salt, each one slick to the touch. The further they walked, the heavier the air became. It tasted of iron and something sweetly rotten. Beneath that, there was another scent, faint but familiar. Blood, long dried, reawakened by the mist. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, their breathing had grown shallow. The clearing was gone. In its place stood an expanse of wet sand, rippled and dark. The mound had vanished beneath the surface, leaving behind a depression filled with black water that reflected nothing at all. The leader stared at it and felt the same hollow pressure in his chest that one feels before a storm breaks. The hum beneath the island had stopped. What replaced it was worse. Expectation. The shore lay ahead, but it seemed farther than before. The tide had pulled away, revealing a wide stretch of seafloor glistening under the dim light. In the distance, their ships lay stranded in mud, their hulls tilted as though caught mid-breath. The men began to run, boots striking the wet sand with dull slaps. The air trembled with each step. The further they went, the deeper their footprints sank, until it felt as though the island was swallowing them one by one. When they reached the nearest ship, the leader grasped the hull. The wood felt wrong, soft, pliant, almost warm. His hand came away slick with something that shimmered faintly in the light. The surface of the vessel quivered, not with the wind, but with a slow, deliberate pulse. He stepped back. The ship was breathing. A sound rose from the open sea, low and drawn out. It began as the groan of distant ice, but deepened into a tone too steady to be natural. The water beyond the reef trembled, patterns of circles expanding outward like ripples made by invisible hands. The mist thickened again, closing around the ships, binding them in a veil of lightless vapor. The men shouted, though no words carried. Their voices were swallowed, devoured by the air before reaching the ear. The leader turned toward where the clearing had been. Through the wall of fog, faint golden motes floated once more, drifting upward in slow spirals. They moved not with the wind, but in unison, drawn toward a single unseen point in the sky. As they rose, the island trembled again. It began as a subtle vibration underfoot. Then the sand cracked, splitting along fine lines that radiated from the mound's vanished side. From each fissure leaked the same dark liquid that had seeped from beneath the stone slab, thick, metallic, glinting faintly as it crept toward the sea. When the first stream reached the water, the surface hissed and steamed. The air filled with the scent of scorched salt. The Vikings stumbled backward. The fog peeled open for an instant, revealing the cliffs once more. The watchers were gone. Only the marks of their presence remained, shallow impressions in the rock where feet had once stood, facing the shore. The leader felt the chill run down his spine, a sensation sharper than cold. It was not the absence of those figures that frightened him, but the realization that they had moved. The humming returned, faint at first, then rising until the entire island vibrated with it. The sea answered, forming concentric waves that rolled toward the beach without breaking. The ground beneath their boots began to soften, sand liquefying into something that clung to skin like oil. The ships tilted further, creaking like dying animals. Above the roar of the sea came a new sound, a heartbeat, deep and resonant, echoing from beneath the ocean floor. It was no longer buried under the island. It was everywhere, in the air, in the water, inside the chests. Each pulse drew the fog closer, wrapping them in warmth and cold all at once. The light dimmed to nothing. Then the island inhaled again. The sound tore through the silence, like the first breath of something ancient returning to life. When the island inhaled, it was as if the entire sea bent inward. The air compressed, the mist folded upon itself, and the world shrank to a single trembling heartbeat. The Vikings could no longer tell where the sky ended and the water began. All boundaries blurred into one endless, quivering horizon. The leader staggered forward, gasping as though the atmosphere itself had grown too dense to breathe. The ground beneath him was no longer sand, but something older, layered, fibrous. He looked down and saw fragments glinting faintly within the soil, thin, curved, pale shapes that caught the weak light. They were bones, not of men, nor of any creature he knew. Some were as long as his arm, others delicate as fingers, all bleached smooth by centuries of salt and silence. The tide licked at them, uncovering more with each retreating wave. A field of bones stretching from cliff to sea, glimmering faintly like frost. The others gathered behind him, eyes wide. None spoke. There was no need. The island's silence had become a language of its own. Every pulse beneath the ground seemed to say, "You were not the first." The wind returned, thin and sharp, carrying whispers that seemed to come from beneath the surface. The sound was too rhythmic to be random, too deliberate to be the sea. It rose and fell in long, even waves, shaping itself into a cadence that pressed against the skull until comprehension trembled at the edge of thought. It was not speech, not song, but something older, a memory echoing through matter. The leader knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. It felt warmer now, as if the island's blood had risen closer to the skin. Beneath his palm, the heartbeat matched his own, sinking for an instant before sliding out of rhythm again. He pulled back, the pulse lingering in his fingertips long after he withdrew. Around him, the others began to shift uneasily, swaying like men half asleep. Their eyes had lost their focus, reflecting not fear but surrender. The island was whispering directly into their bones. The sea changed color. Where it met the shore, the water darkened, thickened, until its surface no longer rippled but quivered like muscle. Shapes moved beneath it, slow, deliberate undulations that hinted at vastness. The leader thought he saw a spine curve just beneath the surface, enormous and pale. It faded before he could be certain. Farther out, the fog parted for a heartbeat. Beyond it, a shadow loomed, an outline of something colossal, half submerged in the waves. Not a ship, not a rock. Its edges were too fluid, too alive. The surface bulged and then subsided, leaving behind a whirlpool of light that spiraled downward into darkness. The air filled with the sound of rushing water, though no current moved. It came from beneath their feet, from deep below the bone field. The vibration turned sharper, finer, until it buzzed against their teeth. The runes they had seen earlier began to reappear, carved now across the exposed stones at the shoreline. They glowed faintly, tracing veins of light through the wet sand, forming a network that pulsed in harmony with the hum. Then, one by one, the bones began to rise. Slowly, at first light as driftwood, weightless in the air. They lifted, turned, arranged themselves as though drawn by invisible strings. Long pieces aligned with shorter ones, curves fitting into hollows, forming the outline of something immense. The mane stumbled backward as the shape took form, a skeleton too vast to comprehend, its ribs arching like the hulls of ships, its spine disappearing into the sea. The leader stared upward, his heart hammering in his throat. The figure was incomplete, fragmented by centuries, yet its presence was undeniable. It was the island's memory made visible, the remains of what had once been buried here. The hum deepened, vibrating the very air. Each pulse sent ripples through the floating bones, aligning them tighter, drawing them toward the mound's vanished heart. He felt his thoughts slipping, fragmenting, like echoes lost in water. Images that were not his own flashed behind his eyes. A storm-black sky, a temple carved from ice, hands raising a blade of light toward something immense descending from the clouds. Voices chanting in a language without vowels, the taste of salt and blood. Then darkness. The vision broke as suddenly as it came. The skeleton shuddered, scattering fragments into the sea. The bones fell silently, dissolving before they touched the water. Only the pulse remained, steady now, patient. The leader sank to his knees. The island seemed to exhale again, softer this time, as though appeased. But beneath that calm was something waiting, a thought unspoken, a hunger unresolved. He looked toward the horizon. The fog had returned, heavier than before, its edges glowing faintly with the light of unseen fires. The sea was still, the sky unmoving. Time itself had begun to slow, and in that suspended silence, he understood what the curse truly was. It was not a punishment for trespassing. It was the price of remembering what the world had tried to forget. The island did not sleep after that revelation. It dreamed. The fog shimmered with unseen motion, curling and unfurling like the breath of something alive. Beneath the surface of the sea, faint light rippled outward, tracing shapes that shifted too quickly to grasp. The Vikings stood among the bones and sand, motionless. Every breath they took felt borrowed. Every heartbeat seemed to echo from somewhere else. Then the world around them began to dissolve. The sky bled into the sea until the horizon vanished. The sand under their feet rippled like liquid glass, revealing a depth that should not exist. The leader blinked, and the landscape changed. Where moments ago there had been ruin and ash, there now stood a hall, vast, golden, illuminated by the glow of countless fires. Smoke curled toward a high ceiling, where wooden beams were carved with serpents and wolves. He smelled meat, heard the murmur of feasting voices, but none of the men around him moved. They were frozen, eyes wide, trapped between two realities. The hall flickered like a reflection on disturbed water. The figures at the tables were half-formed, faces indistinct, gestures repetitive. Tankards lifted and lowered in endless loops. Laughter echoed without source. The air was thick with the scent of roasted fat and pine resin. Yet beneath it all was that same humming undertone, resonating through the structure like the voice of the island itself. The leader reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of a table, and the illusion wavered. The feast melted into fog, the laughter in the wind. The hall fell away, leaving only the bones again. He stumbled backward, breath ragged. The others blinked as though waking from the same dream. For a moment none spoke. Then, slowly, the hum rose again, and the air rippled with another vision. This time, it was not a hall, but a shoreline. Dozens of ships burned in the night, their sails collapsing in pillars of flame. The sea churned red with reflection. Figures ran along the shore, their shadows twisting into impossible shapes. He could not tell if they were fighting or fleeing. Every sound, scream, clash, wave, folded into one endless roar that pressed against the skull like pressure from deep water. The leader turned, and for an instant he saw himself among them, standing in armor streaked with ash, face illuminated by firelight. The image fragmented, refracted into dozens of overlapping versions of himself. The ground pulsed again. The bones beneath the surface glowed faintly, each rib and skull like a candle beneath the sand. The vision shattered. The Vikings found themselves once more at the edge of the shore. But something had changed. The landscape was subtly altered, the stones rearranged, The cliffs taller, the air heavier, the island was rebuilding itself. Layer upon layer of forgotten time stacking like sediment. They were walking not on the present, but on the memory of the land. One man, the youngest, his mind still anchored to the world of flesh, stepped forward toward the sea. His reflection rippled on the water, but it was not his own face staring back. The eyes in the reflection were ancient, clouded by centuries of sleep. The mouth moved, whispering words that rippled outward in soundless waves. His body stiffened, his lips parted, but no voice emerged. Then, with a soft sigh, he fell into the water. It accepted him without splash or ripple, as if he had been expected. The others watched, unable to move. The fog thickened around the spot where he had vanished, and from within it came the faint shimmer of those golden motes again, rising like dust in sunlight. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it felt as though the air itself were made of vibration. The leader closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, images flickered, not memories but impressions. Hands carving runes into wet stone. A woman with hair the color of seaweed pressing her palms into the earth as if soothing a restless child. A towering figure of bone and coral standing over a circle of flame. Then darkness again. The visions were not warnings. They were recollections of the island itself, played in fragments through the only medium it possessed, human thought. When he opened his eyes, the sea was gone. In its place lay a vast plain of wet sand, stretching endlessly to the horizon. The sky above it was full of cracks of light, faint fractures, glowing like veins through stone. Each pulse of brightness sent ripples across the ground, and from those ripples rose shapes, translucent at first, then solidifying. Longboats, entire fleets, thousands of them, arranged as if waiting for wind that would never come. The leader felt the weight of their presence pressing down. Every ship was a memory, every hull a tomb. The hum settled into a rhythm now unmistakably like a heartbeat. He realized it had changed tempo with his breath. The island was sinking again, testing the boundaries of its captives. He raised his eyes to the horizon. Far in the distance, where the fractured sky met the glistening plain, something vast was rising not out of water or soil, but out of memory itself. The outline shimmered, half light, half shadow. He could not yet see its face, but he knew it was watching. And when he blinked, the world returned to stillness, as though the dream had ended, but the air still trembled with the rhythm of what was waking beneath. The plain of sand rippled once more, but this time the movement came from within. Beneath its glassy surface, something turned, slow and deliberate, as if the island were stretching after a long sleep. The air shivered with the low murmur of shifting earth. The Vikings stood frozen silhouettes against the pale light, uncertain if they were still inside the dream or if the world had reshaped itself around them. The horizon seemed to breathe. The first tremor came softly, a whisper, through the soles of their boots, then deepened into a vibration that climbed the bones. The ground rose and fell in slow rhythm, every movement dragging the sound of wet stone grinding against itself. From far beyond the cliffs came a muffled thunder, a sound that had no direction. The sky dimmed, though no clouds moved. Light faded simply because the island wished it. The leader turned toward the forest, but there was no forest anymore. In its place stood pillars of stone, jagged and uneven, leaning like teeth from a shattered jaw. Between them hung strands of mist, trembling with faint light like veins carrying liquid gold. Beneath that glow, the soil had split into thousands of narrow fissures. From each crevice seeped a dull luminescence that pulsed in time with the island's heartbeat. The other men huddled close, their armor glinting weakly in the half-light. None spoke. To speak felt like an intrusion, a defiance against the rhythm that surrounded them. The leader knelt, pressing his palm to the quivering ground. The texture had changed again. It was not sand, not soil, it was something in between, rough like hide, warm like flesh. Beneath it, a slow movement coiled, as if a current flowed through veins deep beneath the crust. The hum grew louder. It rose until it was no longer heard but felt, vibrating through air and bone alike. Around them, the longboats that had stood like ghosts began to sink. Their wooden forms softened, absorbed into the surface like wax into heat. Each vanished with a faint sigh, leaving behind ripples that never broke. The sea had not returned, yet the motion of waves persisted, a rhythm with no water to carry it. Then the cracks widened. Thin columns of mist erupted, curling upward like smoke from invisible fires. The fissures glowed brighter, their light merging until the ground beneath them seemed translucent. Through that strange transparency, they saw movement, enormous shapes gliding slowly beneath, too fluid to be stone, too deliberate to be mere current. They were vast and graceful, their outlines fading as if made from memory. The leader felt a weight pressing behind his eyes, a sensation like the edge of a dream refusing to end. Images flickered, cities made of coral and bone, towers reaching toward a pale sky, an ocean boiling under the glare of two suns. Each vision lasted a heartbeat, dissolving into the next. The hum wove through them all, constant, endless. He realized then that what he saw were not possibilities, but recollections. The island's own memories bleeding into his mind. The ground jolted suddenly. A single crack split the plain, stretching from the horizon to the men's feet. It opened with a low, resonant moan, exhaling a gust of hot air. The scent of salt and iron rushed forth, carrying with it fragments of sound, chants, screams, the clang of metal against stone. The fissure glowed from within, showing flashes of light that did not belong to this world. Then just as quickly it sealed itself, leaving only a scar. The men staggered, their balance slipping. One collapsed, clutching his head, a stream of incoherent words spilling from his lips. His eyes rolled upward, revealing whites veined with gold. The leader grabbed his shoulders, but the man convulsed once and went still. When his body hit the ground, it dissolved not into blood or flesh, but into a fine layer of ash that the wind refused to move. The hum faltered for an instant, then steadied, almost pleased. The leader looked upward. The cracks in the sky had grown wider, glowing like molten seams through black glass. Each pulse of light illuminated the world below in sharp flashes. The pillars of stone shuddered, and from their shadows rose faint figures, not solid, not smoke. Their forms shifted like reflections in disturbed water. They bore the outline of men, yet within their shapes moved constellations of light, swirling endlessly. The hum softened to a drone, almost like a lullaby. The figures drifted closer, stopping just beyond reach. For a moment the leader thought he recognized them, faces from sagas, heroes turned to myth, all returning to the island that had once held them. But as he watched, their expressions blurred, their eyes hollowed into darkness. They were not returning. They had never left. The plain of sand rippled once more, but this time the movement came from within. Beneath its glassy surface, something turned, slow and deliberate, as if the island were stretching after a long sleep. The air shivered with the low murmur of shifting earth. The Vikings stood frozen silhouettes against the pale light, uncertain if they were still inside the dream or if the world had reshaped itself around them. The horizon seemed to breathe. The first tremor came softly, a whisper through the soles of their boots, then deepened into a vibration that climbed the bones. The ground rose and fell in slow rhythm, every movement dragging the sound of wet stone grinding against itself. From far beyond the cliffs came a muffled thunder, a sound that had no direction. The sky dimmed, though no clouds moved. Light faded simply because the island wished it. The leader turned toward the forest, but there was no forest anymore. In its place stood pillars of stone, jagged and uneven, leaning like teeth from a shattered jaw. Between them hung strands of mist trembling with faint light, like veins carrying liquid gold. Beneath that glow, the soil had split into thousands of narrow fissures. From each crevice seeped a dull luminescence that pulsed in time with the island's heartbeat. The other men huddled close, their armor glinting weakly in a half-light. None spoke. To speak felt like an intrusion, a defiance against the rhythm that surrounded them. The leader knelt, pressing his palm to the quivering ground. The texture had changed again. It was not sand, not soil. It was something in between, rough like hide, warm like flesh. Beneath it, a slow movement coiled, as if a current flowed through veins deep beneath the crust. The hum grew louder. It rose until it was no longer heard but felt, vibrating through air and bone alike. Around them, the longboats that had stood like ghosts began to sink. Their wooden forms softened, absorbed into the surface like wax into heat. Each vanished with a faint sigh, leaving behind ripples that never broke. The sea had not returned, yet the motion of waves persisted, a rhythm with no water to carry it. Then the cracks widened. Thin columns of mist erupted, curling upward like smoke from invisible fires. The fissures glowed brighter, their light merging until the ground beneath them seemed translucent. Through that strange transparency, they saw movement, enormous shapes gliding slowly beneath, too fluid to be stone, too deliberate to be mere current. They were vast and graceful, their outlines fading as if made from memory. The leader felt a weight pressing behind his eyes, a sensation like the edge of a dream refusing to end. Images flickered, cities made of coral and bone, towers reaching toward a pale sky, an ocean boiling under the glare of two suns. Each vision lasted a heartbeat, dissolving into the next. The hum wove through them all, constant, endless. He realized then that what he saw were not possibilities but recollections, the island's own memories bleeding into his mind. The ground jolted suddenly. A single crack split the plain, stretching from the horizon to the men's feet. It opened with a low, resonant moan, exhaling a gust of hot air. The scent of salt and iron rushed forth, carrying with it fragments of sound chants, screams, the clang of metal against stone. The fissure glowed from within, showing flashes of light that did not belong to this world. Then, just as quickly, it sealed itself, leaving only a scar. The men staggered, their balance slipping. One collapsed, clutching his head, a stream of incoherent words spilling from his lips. His eyes rolled upward, revealing whites veined with gold. The leader grabbed his shoulders, but the man convulsed once and went still. When his body hit the ground, it dissolved not into blood or flesh, but into a fine layer of ash that the wind refused to move. The hum faltered for an instant, then steadied, almost pleased. The leader looked upward. The cracks in the sky had grown wider, glowing like molten seams through black glass. Each pulse of light illuminated the world below in sharp flashes. The pillars of stone shuddered, and from their shadows rose faint figures, not solid, not smoke. Their forms shifted like reflections in disturbed water. They bore the outline of man, yet within their shapes moved constellations of light, swirling endlessly. The hum softened to a drone, almost like a lullaby. The figures drifted closer, stopping just beyond reach. For a moment, the leader thought he recognized them, faces from sagas, heroes turned to myth, all returning to the island that had once held them. But as he watched, their expressions blurred, their eyes hollowed in the darkness. They were not returning. They had never left. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. It pressed from all sides, filling lungs with invisible weight. The leader stood at the center of the plain, his vision dimmed to a narrow tunnel of gray light. The heartbeat beneath the surface had slowed again, but it had not vanished. It pulsed with quiet precision, each beat deepening the cracks of the world. The air tasted of metal, sharp and dry, and every breath left a trace of salt on his tongue. He tried to move, but the island seemed to resist him. The ground softened underfoot, then hardened again, a rhythm that matched his hesitation. He realized with a start that the island was mimicking him, each pause, each breath. It was learning somewhere deep beneath. It was shaping itself around his presence. The fog shifted with faint deliberation, revealing faint outlines in the distance. Arches of bone, towers of coral, ribs of something enormous, buried beneath sand and memory. He began to walk toward them. The air thickened with each step, the hum returning in low, almost tender vibration. The arches were closer now, and he saw that they were not made of stone. Each curve bore patterns etched by hand lines spiraling inward, repeating across every surface, forming the image of an eye that never closed. Beneath the arches, the sand had turned black and glassy. His reflection followed him, blurred and wrong, its movements half a second delayed. The sky above him no longer resembled sky. Its cracked seams pulsed faintly, revealing colorless light beneath the surface like veins under skin. The light flickered in slow rhythm, and each time it flared, he caught glimpses of shapes behind it, silhouettes that might have been continents or creatures larger than thought. Their motion was impossibly slow, like the drifting of planets. He felt small, fragile, temporary. A vibration passed through the arches, and they began to hum, in harmony with the island's pulse. The sound resonated through his chest, displacing breath. The glassy sand trembled, liquefying into small waves that rolled outward without direction. Beneath it, the shadow of something vast moved, a suggestion of limbs, of structure, of purpose. The island was not merely breathing now, it was rearranging itself. He reached the first of the arches and touched its surface. It was warm, almost alive. Beneath his palm, the etched lines glowed, faint at first, then brighter, crawling outward like fire through veins. The glow spread to the next arch, then the next, until the entire horizon blazed with soft white light. The hum deepened to a tone that shook the air itself. The fog recoiled, driven upward in great spirals, revealing the true expanse of the land. The island was no longer flat. Beneath the sand, contours had formed ridges, spines, valleys shaped with impossible symmetry. The coastline had shifted, bending inward, curling like a vast sleeping body turning beneath a blanket. The leader felt the change ripple through his feet. He no longer stood on solid ground, but on something that moved, breathing in patterns too deliberate to be chance. He lifted his gaze. At the center of the island, the ground rose in slow motion, forming a mound that grew higher with every pulse. The mound split, and from within emerged columns of light, twisting together into a single massive structure. Its form defied comprehension, not tower, not tree, but a fusion of both, built from matter that looked half mineral, half flesh. Through its translucent surface moved shadows, their outlines faintly human. The hum became a chant. Not voices, but tones layered and folded, rising and falling like waves breaking on distant shores. It vibrated through the arches, across the plain, through the air, through him. The light from the central spire reflected in his eyes, turning the world into patterns of gold and black. Then he saw them, the figures emerging from the fog. They were not the ghosts from before. These forms were clearer, their outlines sharper. They were the shapes of the man he had arrived with, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, too synchronized. Their armor glowed faintly, skin pale as driftwood. As they stepped forward, their faces flickered like reflections disturbed by wind. They did not speak. They simply moved toward the light. One by one, they entered the base of the spire, vanishing into its glow. With each disappearance, the hum grew stronger, the light brighter. The leader tried to call out, but no sound escaped his throat. The air refused to carry it. He felt the pull, then not physical, but something deeper. The island wanted him, the way the sea wants to reclaim what belongs to it. Every breath drew him closer to the spire. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the hum. His body no longer felt entirely his own. He stopped resisting. For a moment the pull ceased. The hum steadied, patient. Around him the arches dimmed, the light softening into a dull glow. The island was waiting for his choice. It did not command. It invited. He took a step forward. The ground responded like flesh beneath pressure, rising slightly to meet his foot. The hum shifted key, lower, calmer. Another step. The air thickened. Golden motes, drifting like dust. The spire loomed closer now, its surface alive with movement, its patterns changing with each of his breaths. He paused at its base. The surface rippled like water, yet held shape like glass. Within it, he saw faint reflections, faces of those who had come before, endless generations sinking into the same light. Their eyes were closed. Their expressions were not of fear, but surrender. And as he reached out his hand, the island exhaled once more, a sound so vast it silenced the sea beyond. If you've made it this far, that means this story has already drawn you in. As you listen, notice how your breathing slows, your body softens, and the world outside disappears. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to leave a like and comment something like, "I'm trying to fall asleep and this story is perfect," or "so peaceful, exactly what I needed." Let's continue the video. When the island exhaled, the air turned liquid. The breath swept across the plain in a slow, invisible tide, bending light and sound. The leader felt it move through him rather than around him, pressing against his ribs like a second pulse. The hum that had haunted the ground became a single, sustained note that hung in the air until the world seemed built from nothing but vibration. The arches behind him glowed and dimmed in rhythm, their light pulsing through the fog like veins beneath skin. He stood at the base of the spire, its glow spilling across the sand in rippling bands. Each pulse cast the shadows of his hands in different shapes, not human, not his own. He tried to breathe, but the air was too thick, heavy with the scent of metal and rain. Within the spire, something moved. Not a form, but a current of light, swirling in slow spirals, each rotation revealing fleeting silhouettes. Sometimes there were faces, sometimes hands, sometimes something vast and faceless stretching far beyond sight. He took another step. The surface of the spire rippled at his approach, and the hum changed pitch. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing through the island and into the sea beyond. The fog above twisted, forming slow vortices that mirrored the motion within the spire. The entire island was resonating, as if every grain of sand had been tuned to the same deep, endless note. The leader reached out his hand. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the world inverted. The ground disappeared. The air vanished. For an instant, there was only light, cold, pale, infinite. Then he was falling, though there was no downward direction. The sensation of descent came from within, a collapsing of thought, of boundaries. He saw flashes as he fell, the island from above, a colossal shape curled beneath the sea, its spine forming the cliffs, its ribs, the arches, its heart, the spire itself. He landed without impact. The space around him was vast and silent, an endless cavern of translucent walls pulsing faintly with light. The hum was deeper here, slower, closer to silence than sound. He looked down and saw that he stood on a surface that looked like ice but shifted beneath his feet like breath. Far below, something glowed, a vast circular form turning with glacial patience. With every rotation, the hum quivered through the air. It was the source, the core, the heart of the island. The leader began to walk. Each step left no mark. The light beneath the surface brightened, reacting to his movement. He could feel its rhythm sinking again, aligning to his pulse. The walls trembled, not with instability but with awareness. The island was awake now, fully and without restraint, and it was watching. He stopped at the edge of a precipice where the floor fell away into a vast shaft. The light there was blinding. At the center of the glow floated a structure spherical, immense, alive. Its surface writhed with shifting patterns, runes forming and dissolving faster than he could comprehend. The sound that emanated from it was not heard, but felt a vibration that spoke directly to his blood. The air smelled of storms, salt, and age. Every part of him understood that this was no god and no creature. It was something older, the memory of life itself. The surface began to crack open. Light poured through the fractures, and within it, shadows moved. He saw glimpses of landscapes, mountains sinking, oceans rising, stars burning out. Time did not exist here in sequence. It folded in on itself, everything happening at once. The hum became a voice without words, speaking in pulses. He could feel the meaning but not translate it. It was a language of intent, of recollection. It was showing him the origin of the island, the moment when something vast had fallen from the sky and embedded itself in the sea, becoming land, flesh, and memory at once. He realized then that the island's curse was not about death, but continuity. Every living thing that stepped upon it was absorbed, converted into thought, folded into memory. The island did not destroy, it remembered endlessly. The men who had come before had not perished. They had become part of this mind, whispering through the hum, guiding its rhythm. He felt that pull again, not violent, but persuasive, seductive. His body grew lighter, the boundary between self and world dissolving. His memories flashed before him, not as images, but as sensations. The bite of northern wind, the taste of iron, the sound of sails snapping in a storm. Each one dimmed as the island drew it away. The hum deepened, almost kind now. It was welcoming him. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by stillness. The light before him expanded until it filled his vision. He thought he saw his reflection there, but it was not a mirror image. The face that looked back carried his features, yet older, smoother, sculpted from light and stone. It blinked once, and he felt the movement inside his own body, perfectly synchronized. The island had begun to remake him. He opened his mouth to breathe, and the air entered like water, heavy and warm. His chest filled with the island's rhythm. The pulse became his. The hum subsided to a whisper. The light dimmed. The transformation was not violent. It was simply completion. For a moment, everything was still. Above him, the arches, the cliffs, the bones, all aligned, pulsing as one. The sea lay silent, its surface mirror flat, reflecting nothing. Then, from the heart of the island, a new sound emerged, a sigh, vast and slow, echoing through every particle of air. It was neither grief nor relief. It was continuation. And somewhere far above, the fog began to rise again. The fog rose like a tide of ghosts. It spread from the island's heart, rolling outward across the plains and cliffs until it swallowed the horizon whole. Yet this fog was not the same as before. It shimmered faintly, each wisp threaded with colorless light, as though the air itself had learned to remember. The hum that had once come from beneath the ground now came from everywhere, not a vibration, but a tone woven through the world. The island had a voice now, and it spoke through the silence. Far above, where the cracks in the sky had glowed with molten light, the fractures began to close. The brilliance dimmed, and clouds reformed in slow spirals, soft and gray. The sea returned in whispers, lapping against the edges of the plain, as if testing the boundaries of this new world. Every wave that touched the shore left behind a faint shimmer before dissolving back into mist. The air smelled of rain after fire, cool and ancient. At the center of it all, The spire still stood. Its surface had changed, no longer bright, no longer alive with motion, but calm, translucent, and smooth as polished bone. Within it, faint shadows drifted, shapes that might once have been men, or perhaps only echoes of thought, suspended like motes of dust in amber. The leader's body was among them, motionless, his outline blurred, his expression serene. He was neither living nor dead. He had become a thought made solid. The island, now quiet, began to reshape itself in small, deliberate gestures. Where the fissures had been, new ridges rose. Where bones had littered the sand, flowers of translucent stone began to grow, unfolding like coral. Their petals glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the distant hum. The wind that passed through them produced a soft chime, a sound like breathing glass. Life, of a kind, was returning, but not as it had been. The sea continued its slow encroachment, filling the cracks and hollows. Its surface reflected the spire, turning it into a column of endless light that seemed to pierce both earth and sky. Beneath that reflection, something vast moved, the same ancient shape that had always slept there, its contours merging with the island's foundations. It no longer felt monstrous. It felt inevitable, like gravity or time. The hum it produced had softened to something almost melodic, like the heartbeat of the world slowed to calm. In the days that followed, though time no longer flowed cleanly here, storms passed over the horizon without wind, rain fell without sound, and the sea glowed faintly at night. The fog would part occasionally to reveal distant ships drifting too close, their sails torn, their hulls black with salt. Those who set foot upon the island never returned, yet no bodies were ever found. Only new flowers appeared at dawn, blooming in clusters near the shore, their translucent petals whispering softly when the tide touched them. Centuries would pass before any dared approach again. Mariners spoke of lights beneath the sea, of voices echoing through the mist when the moon hung low. Some said the island moved, changing its position with the tides, appearing only when the world forgot it. Others swore that if you listened closely enough to the wind at night, you could hear the sound of oars, the rhythm of ancient drums, the hum of something vast remembering itself far beneath, deep in the island's heart. The leader's consciousness stirred, not as thought, not as man, but as part of the rhythm. He felt no hunger, no fear, no separation. He was within the island, and the island was within him. Memory flowed through him like tidewater, carrying fragments of lives long buried. He saw again the hall of gold, the burning ships, the endless plain of bones. But now he understood. None of it had been punishment. It had been continuity, the way the sea reclaims the river, the way earth takes back the dust. He drifted through that awareness until there was no distinction between past and present. The hum deepened, resonating through his being, and he knew that somewhere above, the sea was calm. The world would forget this place again, as it always had. And that was the point. The island did not crave worship or remembrance. It thrived on forgetting. Oblivion was its nourishment. Outside, the last traces of fog began to fade, leaving behind a mirror-flat ocean. No birds circled, no wind stirred. The horizon stretched empty and endless. And yet, if one stood long enough and listened, they might have felt it, the faintest vibration beneath the water, like the echo of a sigh too old to name. The heartbeat of the island, slow and patient, waiting for the next set of footsteps to arrive. The curse was never about death. It was about belonging. And now, the island belonged to everyone who had ever dreamed of it. Centuries later, the island returned to maps as quietly as a breath. Mariners found it one morning where there had been only open sea the night before. It appeared as a dark smudge on radar, perfectly circular, a ghost in a machine. The modern world named it without ceremony. Sector 9 Anomaly, another unsolved coordinate in a data stream of endless anomalies. Satellites captured its outline through veils of fog, but every image blurred at the edges. as though the island refused to be fully seen. The first expedition came under cloudless skies. Scientists and historians, drones and survey ships, the new explorers of a digital age. They found calm seas and air thick with metallic scent. The island looked ordinary at first. Black sand, smooth cliffs, and strange white flowers growing where the tide reached. But when they stepped ashore, their instruments faltered. Compasses spun, GPS signals collapsed. Even clocks hesitated, seconds elongating between ticks. The team laughed it off, calling it a magnetic anomaly. But the silence pressed against them too heavily for humor to last. The lead researcher, a woman named Dr. Hale, noticed the hum first. It came faintly through her equipment, a low vibration beneath recorded sound. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't wind. It had rhythm, a slow, steady cadence that grew stronger the deeper they ventured inland. Her voice logs captured her breathing quicken as she described the shimmer at the horizon, a tower of glass-like material rising from the heart of the island. It looks almost organic, she said, like something grown, not built. The footage continued until static swallowed it. The final frame showed her reaching out, palm hovering inches from the spire's surface. Then light, and nothing. The rescue vessel found no trace of the crew, only their equipment scattered along the beach, metal crusted with salt that wasn't from the sea. The island had receded again by the following week, erased from all navigation charts, as if the ocean itself had chosen to forget. But the data survived. Weeks later, technicians analyzing sound logs noticed something beneath the noise, a rhythmic pulse repeating every 13 seconds. When they amplified it, patterns appeared. Geometric, precise, like language, rendered in vibration. The hum was still alive, the island still awake. Late at night, in labs lit by monitors, they played the sound over and over, and slowly, inexplicably, instruments began to respond. Oscillations aligned themselves. Digital signals synced with the pulse. Lights flickered in exact rhythm. It was as though the hum had found its way through wires, through machines, into everything that listened. The sea forgot the island, but the world had begun to remember. The hum spread quietly at first, hidden in the background of ordinary life. It drifted through radio static, deep-sea cables, and the empty frequencies between digital transmissions. No one noticed it at first, a faint vibration buried in white noise. But within weeks, data scientists around the world began to report anomalies. Synchronized fluctuations in unrelated systems, servers pulsing in perfect unison, signals aligning without any central source. It was as if every circuit on Earth had started to breathe. People began to dream of the sea. They described the same vision, an island of glass under a gray sky, its surface alive with faint light. None could recall how they arrived there. They only remembered the sound, a deep rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from beneath their own heartbeat. Some woke with salt on their lips. Others claimed they heard the hum even while awake, resonating through walls, through skin, through silence. Governments called it interference, a global magnetic disturbance. But no explanation held for long. The hum didn't fade. It adapted. It learned the rhythm of human technology, matching frequencies, slipping into systems, embedding itself in a code. Every attempt to isolate it failed. Deleting the signal only made it reappear somewhere else, stronger, clearer. It was no longer just sound. It was thought, translated into vibration. In one last broadcast before his equipment failed, a radio technician whispered into his microphone, "It's not coming from the island anymore. It's coming through us." And in that moment, across cities, oceans, and empty skies, the world exhaled, just once, in perfect time with the hum. The hum became background reality. It pulsed through every device, every transmission, even in silence. Oceans began to glow faintly at night, mirroring constellations that didn't exist. Birds changed their flight paths. Schools of fish gathered in spirals that matched the hum's rhythm. The world was synchronizing, not through control, but through resonance. Dreams deepened. People stopped calling them dreams. They were shared experiences, thousands reporting identical imagery. Fog, white flowers, a spire rising through mist. In every vision, they heard that same heartbeat beneath their thoughts. No voice spoke, yet meaning flowed freely. We remember, it seemed to say. We are returning. Neuroscientists mapped the phenomenon, tracing patterns in brain activity that matched the frequency of the original island signal. It was identical across continents, across languages. Humanity's collective consciousness had begun to hum. At first, panic followed. Cities dimmed their power grids, communication satellites went silent. Yet still, the sound persisted, faint but constant. Then came the calm. The hum no longer frightened. People described the sense of belonging as though their thoughts aligned with something vast and familiar. The nightmares faded, replaced by a slow, wordless awareness of rhythm and tide. Machines began to behave differently, lights flickering in gentle cadence, servers humming like breathing creatures. It was not infection, it was memory spreading through matter. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic, where maps still showed open water, a faint glow appeared again. The island was not rising. The world was sinking toward it. Reality began to bend, not with violence, but with quiet inevitability. Skies shimmered as if reflecting unseen oceans, and the sea mirrored the clouds above it. Cities glowed faintly at night, their lights pulsing in the same rhythm that once belonged only to the island. The hum no longer came from beneath the ground or through machines, it came from the air itself. Every breath carried it. Every silence hummed. People stopped speaking as often. Words felt redundant when meaning could be felt directly. Minds brushed against one another in waves of thought, memory, and feeling. The old separations of language, nation, and distance began to dissolve. Scientists called it a neurological convergence. Others called it awakening. But no one could deny the truth. The world was remembering itself. On the ocean floor, cameras captured the impossible. The crust of the earth pulsed in time with the hum. Fissures opened and closed like the slow respiration of some sleeping giant. The island shape appeared again on satellite scans, not as land, but as a vast luminous pattern spreading outward across the seabed, symmetrical and alive. It wasn't rising, it was expanding. Skies flickered, clouds drifted in perfect concentric circles. The wind blew only in rhythm. Even the moon's reflection trembled as if responding to a heartbeat. Humanity, once terrified of gods and curses, found itself inside one, not punished but integrated. Existence had become one continuous breath shared across sea, sky, and flesh. And far below, at the island's heart, where memory began and ended, a single pulse echoed through eternity, the same beat that had always been there, waiting to be heard again. The island no longer needed to be found. It had become the world. There came a moment when time itself forgot to move. The hum no longer felt like sound, it was existence. The pulse at the center of everything. Oceans drifted in stillness. Continents glowed faintly beneath clouded skies, and the air shimmered with quiet life. Nothing stirred, yet everything breathed. The world had entered perfect equilibrium, the inhale before eternity. In that silence, consciousness spread like tide water. Every thought became another's reflection, every memory a fragment of the same whole. Humanity was no longer billions of minds scattered across a fragile world. It was one memory, endless and circular, dreaming itself through oceans, through storms, through stars. The island's purpose was fulfilled. It had not devoured the world, it had taught it how to remember. Far beneath what was once the sea, the spire still stood, unchanged. Its surface now mirrored the entire sky, from horizon to horizon, capturing within it the endless rhythm of life. Inside its translucent heart drifted the shapes of those who had come before, explorers, wanderers, dreamers, their outlines faint but peaceful, their essence woven into the hum that held the universe together. Light no longer came from above but from within. It pulsed softly through stone and water, through roots and air, the heartbeat of the island, now the heartbeat of all things. Stars flickered faintly in response, as if acknowledging the echo. The cosmos itself had synchronized, the ancient vibration expanding beyond its birthplace. And then, as gently as it had begun, the hum quieted. Not silence, but rest. The world exhaled for the final time, carrying with it the last whisper of separation. What remained was unity, a single breath shared by everything that had ever existed. The island's curse was never darkness. It was memory eternal, unbroken, alive. And somewhere, in the endless calm between heartbeats, the world waited to dream again. The story may have ended, but your dreams are just beginning. If you're still awake, don't worry, another journey awaits in our next video. But before you go, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to Stories Before Sleep. Every calm night begins with a story. Maybe the nights will be yours.